Hey Brobots! Today I'm going to show you how I hand painted my Grimoire Red Beret over a rattle can primed base. That's right, I did not use an airbrush at all for this model, and I'll be giving this away in 3 weeks. Please watch to the end of the video for full details. Hi, I'm Wright, and I made this YouTube channel to share with you my experience as a professional modeler in Japan. Thank you for watching and please subscribe. Here are the steps I'll take you through today. The full main content is on hand brushing the base and detail colors. The bonus content section for my supporters is on painting and weathering the backpack. Okay, let's go. Breaking it down Tokyo apartment style, I can work in a very small space like this, and I've arranged this amount of tools. I started off with a primer with this. I'll be going with some mahogany here for a ground color, and I'll be using this selection of Gaia Notes paints along with some Mr. Color to hand paint using these brushes the base colors on this Gunpla. I'll be using some Gaia Notes thinner, and then for some other steps, if required, I can use a clear like this. So no airbrush, very simple steps, and I'm able to get the model to look like this. First step, let's lay down a primer and base coat all in one with Mr. Color Mahogany using their spray can. The not big secret about using spray cans, well, is to take your time. Don't rush and try to cover in one pass. It's much better to use very light shots and gradually build up over 2 or 3 passes. Personally, I prefer to use spray cans outdoors, but still wear an organic filter mask and eye protection in case the wind turns against me. Here I've used a skewer with a little tape wrapped around to make a secure handle using the convenient display base insertion point. Short, even and light passes, pressing the button before the can is over the model and releasing after the can has passed the model to reduce the risk of splatter. Okay, now kicking off for this first session, I'll be using this cool color from the Gaia Notes range. It's actually a Votom's color, which I thought would be really nifty. It just looks like a perfect match for this one. I'll be applying thinner through my shaker bottle, and you can see there that I've drilled a couple of holes in the top, and the thinner inside there is this one. T07 moderate thinner from Gaia Notes. Really good stuff, super useful. Just one really quick note, I like to use these little paint dishes. And this is from a previous project, and what I'll do is I'll add the green to that, and it will make a custom mix, which always makes you sound way cooler online, doesn't it, than using a straight color. Now what I do is, right, in between sessions, I then replace a slightly larger one like this over the top, and it both keeps the dust out and helps me to work with a stop-start manner. So it's really useful. Want to see that again? Boom! Okay, best tool ever in the history of tools, the Wave Paint Stirrer. These paints are pretty thick by design, so trying to stir them is very difficult. But using one of these bad boys and you get right in there, look at that. Oh, that's a wicked color. Yeah, let's go with that. And you can see it's going to be a little bit different to what I've got underneath there, but that's more than fine. It's a really nice color. I couldn't agree with myself on this color choice. What do you think, guys? Now, if you're a little clean, OCD like me, I don't like to get paint on the lip there because it can interfere with getting a good seal. So while it's still wet, wipe it off. Reseal my paint. Now to help clean up my stirring tool, I usually pour a bit of thinner along the top of it too. It just helps it to less, you get less build-up on the thing. And oddly enough, this is sometimes one of the best mixes of paint. It's the random thinner off the top of the stirrer. Because look at that, see how that's like a perfect sort of thinness for painting. Check it out. That's really nice. I use these dishes to adjust the thickness of the paint. You can see here, I'll dribble it down the side to check the surface tension, color, and opacity. And then very simply, you'll see that I like painting these models as a whole. I mean, we display them as a whole, so when you're painting it as a whole, you can get a better overall idea to how your paint steps are going. Starting off pretty thin, pretty light, I'll simply make some downward strokes on larger sections of the armor. And what I'm planning to do is leave a bit more of the edge showing and poking through so that it takes care of some initial weathering for me, so I don't have to make too many additional steps afterwards. It's a bit of a time-saving exercise. This one's very thin, but super coverage paint. Wow, this Guy Notes paint is so nice. Awesome color, I really like this. Now this looks super rough, because it is, and it can be. I'm simply sketching in some coverage and color coat onto the major sections of the armor. Nice, easy, simple steps in the beginning. As I move around the model, I also add different sections, and to give it a different look, I add different techniques to different sections. So, you can still wet, this is legit. Here I was blocking out, which is basically painting the solid color into the center of some of the panels, and it's blocking the color out on the model. Here, now, I don't know what this technique is called. This is one of the ones I made up sitting here at my bench by myself. I do a streaking effect, and you can see I'm not blocking it out so much as covering all of the model. Now, one of the reasons I do it is, if you look here in my dish, remember I showed you the paint earlier, and it was quite thin and runny. Look at that, see how it's sticking to the side there. Now, I can keep thinning it and keep it the same, thinness over time, but also, one of the things about minimalism with painting is working with what we've got. So as the paint thickens up a little bit like that, if we come back to the model here, you can see that I can start to add some streaky vectors across the model. Now they don't make sense so much now, but you can see that that allows me to build up a weathered look over time, and it's quite nifty. But if I don't show you from the beginning, it won't make sense how it's different later. So look at that. Developing now, the paint ends up being more textured, but it is thinner, is one of the key points about this one. We need a name for it. The half-baked thinness streaking technique.com. I'm just kidding, but yeah, so that's basically it. Now I'll keep doing the model, and I'll do it 50-50, half and half like that. Here's our star, the Red Beret Grimoire, after one pass of the brush with this wonderful color of green from Guy Notes. I've used a dotting, blocking in approach there, and then on the other side of the model here, I've gone for a streakier type approach that I used a slightly thicker kind of paint. Now moving on to a second coat. I've added a little more thinner this morning and reactivated my paint from yesterday. Putting it onto the side of the dish, you can see it's a perfect consistency. I'll come in for a close-up here to show you a little bit better about how to apply, second and third, fourth layers, depending on how many it will take. It's not a fast process in that you can just slop on one layer. It will take multiple layers, just like it does with airbrushing, that you need to apply thin, fine coats. I'll be using a sable brush. This is one that I picked up in Japan, PC Sable. It says it's a size 10. Now by this stage, I'm going to go relatively heavy and with downward vectors to start applying a look that will give it more of a streaking effect later on during our process. So that's my rough work. Now with a little bit of fine tuning, I'll fix up and add some detailing in before moving on. You can see there, I'm minimizing some of the chips to make them look a little bit more scale appropriate, and using different parts of the brush to rough up and accentuate some of the details I've built in. There. That actually looks a little bit more. I'm quite particular. Now there you go. This is looking, even before dry, that's quite good to go without any further weathering steps. Now let's do this to the rest of our model and we'll be back with the next color. Next I'd like to add this second color to the scheme. I'd like to stay pretty close to the box art to do a canon version of the grimoire. So here's this really nifty color from the Gaia Notes range. It's the bottom color I believe that was used on the Zero Sen. It's a very light kind of green. One thing I like to do with Gaia Notes paints is that I paint a circle. Once I've mixed up some paint and added it to my dish like this, I'll paint a circle on top. That way I know exactly what color will be on the plastic. Coming in for some of the detail work, I'm going to switch down to a size 1 brush, again from the Lee & Hardy range that I got from Hobbyco. Simply painting on the inside of where I've painted the dark green, I'll gently put in some of this light paint mix, trying to leave a little bit of green on the outside and leaving some of the shadow coat on the side. I sound a little bit like Duncan from Warhammer, don't I? Nice thin coats. Leave some colors poking out between the layers. But really, it's kind of like a reverse blocking in sort of technique. I'll gradually put this in between, and that way our dark green can act as a chip and revealing some of the darker splotches that have been, where it's dug down deep to the deeper layers of, say, the metal, which is then oxidized and produced a darker color. Let's refine the edge while it's still nice and wet. We can retouch lacquers. They're not as strict as they first seem. You do need to work within their parameters. They are less forgiving than regular water-based acrylics, but many of the effects that we can get are wonderful. It's starting to look kind of cool already. A bit more thin paint. Cool. Let's let that dry and see how it looks on the other sections now. Next up I'm going to paint the red areas and I'm going to base them with this color, Azuki, again by Gaia Notes. I'm looking for a slightly different expression of red this time. Let's try it out. Here's something I'd like to quickly share with you. Can you see the ring around the outside of the paint there? You can see that when you mix in the thinner with a little bit of retarder in it, it helps to make the lacquer paints work like watercolors. So it's slightly, my technique is ever so slightly based on that, but applied for plastic models. We're quite diluted here. Let's apply it as a general wash. So I'd say it's about 50-50 with thinner. And I just want a little bit poking through on the outsides of this. And we'll do it as a nice loose sketch on. The leveling properties of the thinner help it to, it remains relatively cohesive, the paint sticks together pretty well. We'll leave a little bit poking through that we can add for damage later. That is a very nifty color already, I quite like it. Let's highlight our red areas with this one from Gundam Color, MS Red. It's a slightly dark red, it's not scarlet, and I think it'll be perfect for our use on the grimoire. I'm going to leave the darker ring around the outside as a detail, and then come in and highlight the inside area here with the Gundam Color Red. Using this smaller brush, I'm going to carefully paint it in and leave some areas poking through once again to give it a uniform look across all of the grimoire. I tend to use these more difficult pigment paints ever so slightly in a heavier way. say red, yellow, orange. It'll look thicker initially, and then due to the properties of lacquer paints, it will settle down. As a final finishing touch on the green armor, I'm going to do a light overbrush with some thinned light green from Gaia Notes. As you can see, I've thinned the paint quite heavily, and it's very runny, and I'll be wiping a good deal of it off my brush, so it's a very light overbrush. Taking into account the direction of light that we would imagine it would fall on our mecha, I'll do some downward brush strokes with this to accentuate some of the areas that I think would benefit. The upper facing armor here, some top of the armor sections here, front pelvis, and so on. Then, after some basic weathering steps, I was able to bring up the finish to look like this. Quite happy with how closely it matches my vision for the grimoire. Now for the giveaway. In 3 weeks' time, I will announce the winner chosen from the following criteria. First, make sure you are subscribed and have liked the video. Second, please leave me a comment explaining how this particular video will improve your hobby. And third, please head on over to my Patreon website for the exclusive bonus content on the full steps for the backpack. It's an experimental finish for me and a slightly different style of tutorial. I hope you like it. That's it. I'll be back in 3 weeks to announce the winner. Good luck! Hey guys, welcome back for the extra content. Thank you for staying with me. Today I want to do, in keeping with the idea of sharing experiments with you, I want to do a slightly worn snow camo effect, but trying it out with acrylics this time. And I plan to do it on the backpack and the rifle for the grimoire. No brand representation this time. This is just the colors. I chose them purely based on their tones. So it's a red-brown from the Vallejo Air range, which I quite like, a bone color from Game, and then white. They don't need to be any particular quality, I think, for this. It's more of just, they just need to be paint. So any brand should be fine. Again, I could have done it with lacquer, but I'm just a little bit sick of the smell. Really brutally honest there, sometimes I like to get away from it. Performance-wise, it's great, but you know, it's a little bit cold today, so acrylics is the go. For a brush, I want to use this. I've been looking at these before. It's a cellulose-based sponge, so I'll be cutting this out into quarters, I think, and using it as a texturing thing. And I'll be keeping the paints active with a wet palette here. Okay, let's get going. Okay, I've mixed up the 3 colors, and I've made a bit of a base here. Not too heavy, but it's more of a wet overbrush when I'm seeing this. I've seen this technique done by real artists, and we'll stipple it on, and it will texture the base as well. Yeah, that looks cool already. I like. Now, being an acrylic paint too, we should see that it doesn't give quite as much texture as a lacquer. That's one of the things I was thinking. If I use lacquer paints for this technique, it might look a little bit out of scale because the troughs and peaks created with the lacquer paint. It's a good thing and it's a bad thing. There we go. It's building up. That does look kind of cool. There we go. Now I'll just stipple this over it. I'll give it a base of this very light pinky color. I'll come back in a sec and show you the next steps. Okay, coming back after doing the rounds on it, it looks like this. And I'll put some more white and bone color into this mix so it remains a tone of itself. And then I'll work from the top and do a highlight. Now sometimes it's quite textured, but as it dries and settles down, it looks very cool. It's kind of fun to switch off a little bit too. I'm really liking this. But how will it turn out at the end? I'm not sure yet. There we go, like that. And already you can see that's producing quite a cool highlight over the top, but it's allowing some of that pinkishness to poke through. This technique, if it works out, this could be a keeper for us. Okay, I'll let this dry and then we'll check it out and see how the contrast looks before deciding on how to approach it next. Next, after developing the finish up to this, I'm going to do some dry brushing around the outside edges with burnt iron from Ammo by Meg. And I'm choosing it because of the reddish tone that's mixed in with it. Focusing on the edges, I'll start developing a look so that the underlying metal is poking through. Key always, you guys will laugh, how often does Uncle Link say it? Restrain! Restrain yourself! Because most of the time when I see people messing something up, it's because they didn't use restraint. They just, you know, hey, this works a little bit well. Let's absolutely belt the hell out of it and go too far with it, and then, you know, it ruins it. I'm trying to keep a semblance of scale effect in this. You know, it's supposed to be 1/144 scale, right? But also, having said that though, you know, so it's of two minds. I'm trying to do it, but also give it a max sensibility, M-A-K, sensibility. But, you know, I got to be really careful with that. Trying to please too many masters, there's a good chance that I'm going to ruin it. Just for something new. But this is looking okay. A dry brush is fine. As it starts coming off on the brush, I'll start being a little bit more aggressive with it. Like that. Cool. Here we are after a couple of more passes with the dry brushing runs, and nice and restrained here, and then whoops, Link unleashed. Okay, I thought it would be pretty nifty to have half of it quite beat up looking. I walk you through that really quick because I'm sorry, I started getting all inspired once the camera was off, and once you get into the flow with some things, you know, don't do anything to turn it off. So this was all done primarily with a reasonably heavy wet application, and then pulling this out from before, the one we used, the makeup spongy thing, I used that to scuff up some of these heavier sections like this. If it looked a little too uniform, and while it was still a wet coat, I used this then to abrade it slightly, and it actually looks pretty nifty. To further enhance this finish, I'm going to use a little bit of sponge, ye old sponging technique, and I'll use this pretty heavy. You can see there, still plenty of paint on it, maybe a bit too much. There we go. Just to, it's almost camouflaging the previous steps, because whenever we use these, anything like this that's a stamp, I mean, realistically, we're stamping it on, right? They tend to leave somewhat of a telltale stamp. I mean, really, that's really simply, that's it. And once you repeat that over the surface, if you've ever done it with Photoshop, you'll see what I mean. You can see it, it's just repeatedly used too many times. And being an artist, it's kind of our job. I think about it as my responsibility to help my viewer be entertained. So I want to give them as much randomness and difference to look at as possible. So this is somewhat camouflaging. Camouflaging is kind of an interesting way to think about it. I guess I don't often hear it talked about like that. That's how I think about it in my mind. It's a kind of an anti-camouflage. We're you know, Gilligan's Island, when they drag somebody through the sand, they pull down the palm frond to cover their tracks. It's like that. It's Gilligan Island painting, little buddy. Cool. Not too much, just enough. Give it some nice differences. There we go. I think, yeah, cool. To further accentuate our finish, let's go with this, a Series 7, number 1. Very big thanks to Andy Butcher, my mate, for sending this over to me to try. I think I am now good enough to use the Series 7. I'll paint in just a couple of extra scratch marks. Some dings like this. Wow, that's a nice brush. My goodness, that's fine. Oh, I like that a lot. Let's get another one in here. This brush almost does everything itself. Look at that. Gosh, I like that. See if I can use it for a streak. You can. Oh, beautiful. Not too many. See, one like that gives it a nice breakup. It's in, and I've got it contrasting against the angles here. Maybe one up in the glamour beauty area. So this is going to be visible up behind the neck of the mecha. So in the main shot it'll be visible. So I'm going to do a horizontal-ish streaking. There we go. Needs a little bit thicker here. Cool. Here we go. After a couple more rounds, I've highlighted a couple of chips like I did in the Grimoire video, very simply. And I think that's enough for now. I don't want to take too much attention away from the main one. I'll do some very basic weathering now with some oil brusher work, and this will be fine to put on the back of the suit. Okay, a quick change of plan. I decided instead of going very light on the backpack and the rifle, how about I show you more with the backpack and we can go back to doing the rifle. If it turns out, we could come back and do another one of them in the future. So just really quickly, I put out these colors, dark rust, medium rust, and light rust onto my wet palette over in the foggy background there. Flipping my sponge around to the other side, I'm going to go with lightest first. And just hit some of the, around this key detail feature here. Like so. And while that's still drying, I'll quickly go with the second color and do a little bit of a wet blend on the surface. Like so. And same again with the darker one. Like so. And last but not least, I'll go back to the rusty, sorry, what was it? The dark exhaust color. The darkest one, and wet blend that back in over the top like this here. Interesting. Let's run a brush through a little bit of that. Nice damp brush. A little bit of the darker color onto it. Let's introduce some downward streaking vectors here. A bit more yellow into the corner. And streak that in here. Cool, interesting. I'll let that dry, then I'm going to stipple some more of the darker color in there over the top. I'm getting a little bored waiting for it to dry, so I had this stupid idea. How about if we put a bit of water on top and then gently remove some of this these rust effects here. Instead of just applying more and more paint over the top, why can't I kind of wash this back? And I need a flat. And And this one's dry. This one doesn't have any water in it. And let's try this out. Oh, I like that. That's very interesting. So it's left a bit of a bath ring around the outside. Got a bit of interesting mottling up here. The main effect area has gone around the edge there. Cool. Oh, and we get a free streak. How nice is that? Boom. Now that wasn't a tutorial. That was totally winging it. I've never done any of this stuff before. But luckily I've got the video so I can watch back and figure out how I did it. But how cool does that look? Okay, I know the rest of that was a mistake kind of thing, a mistake in progress, but now I know to walk away. I'm happy with how that looks. What do you think, guys? Can we get a close-up? So my camera's having a bit of trouble understanding where to focus. A really quick round of oil paints using the oil brushes. I really do like them for stuff like this. For a bigger project in the future, I will pull out tube oil paints again, but for something like this, these really are perfect. I'm using the same series to keep the color coherency that I used on the main body of the grimoire. That's dark blue, dark brown, starship filth, ammo yellow, and olive green. The only one I'll be adding this time is rust, for some rust effects on the side. Now, putting them off, I've dotted them on carefully, and I'll show you. I just run through basically two steps. I'll start off with the brighter colors first. And this is a dry brush. It's the same one I've been using for a lot of the rounds. It's a Tamiya high finish. I think it's a Sable. It's a Tamiya whatever this really is brush. And I just buy them at the hobby shop. They're pretty cheap for this sort of rough work. So I'll go with the lighter colors first. I had put a bit of yellow in there on the green. But I'm going to mix that with some starship filth and olive green. It's going to be a little bit mucky up on top. And I'll be wiping this off on some tissue as we go. And this is dry into the surface, so it will stain it a fair bit. But I'm going to quickly, before it gets too dry, I'm going to start working it in with some mineral spirit. A little bit nervous about the plastic, but we'll see what we can do. So I got off shot there a little bit. Work it into the paintwork a little here. Blue for shadow. There we go. Looks horrible, isn't it? Maybe it'll work. Wipe, wipe. Bit of rust work here. Oh, that richness of intensity of color. Beautiful, isn't it? I'll find that up in a minute. Okay, now the front. Okay, now let's work this in with some mineral spirit. Using this stuff, it's almost unreadable. The odorless enamel odorless thinners. Any brand is fine. This one just happens to be, I get it off these guys. I'm going to use it with a smallish brush. Actually used quite a bit of this stuff. And blending, mixing it in like this. So I'm turning it into a filter of sorts. I might get a slightly bigger brush. Yeah, let's go with this one. This is the original brush that I kicked off painting the model with. You remember that one from the Hobby Co specials? There we go. Sometimes I'll just mix it around, other times it really is a cleanup job. Now, I haven't put any barrier down, so this is straight onto the plastic and the acrylic paint that we put on it just a few minutes ago. So that will stain very quickly. Which is, you know, I guess at this stage that's what I want. I want it to go in quite quickly, don't I? There we go, filtering in. A bit of a clean up in here, but I put it in heavier there because I wanted a bit of a shadow effect. And a panel line effect at the same time, so I'll let it sink there a little. There we go. And clean up and mix down here. Well, that turned out well. I like that a lot. Cool. A bit more of a mix up here. There we go. Drag some of them down. I think that's starting to look pretty nifty. And this one needs a little bit of fine tuning. I'll use the big brush again. And we'll just there we go. Now, I'm sorry, I can't explain how I did that. I know I just did it, but I don't know how to explain how I get the brush to touch the model in the right way, and it works, and that sounds really stupid. So, that's why I was scared of saying it. Oh well, right. Because the usual way is people will get a really hyper thin brush and they'll drag it down. They'll just do that line, but you could see I put it on a bit thicker and then I dragged it off with an ever so thin part of this really big brush. What is it, a size 4? I mean, so long as you only have part of the brush touching the model, it works, right? It makes sense in a way. Cool. Now, the last part is this side. Juggle, juggle, juggle. And this one's a bit of a horror show on this side. Interesting. I had intended for this to be much cleaner on this side. But it kind of reminds me, as it's going on. Now, I could clean it back, but I won't, because it reminds me of indoor camo, which is a really cool thing. So I'm going to leave all of the happy accidents as possible on this one to invent stuff for the future. So now I've got a bit of a concept on how to do an indoor camo, and that could be way nifty. Okay, that's that. I'm going to set this aside now, let it dry, and I'll come back and we'll get a little photo and see how it reads. And I think this will be good to go for the backpack. Cool experiments. Thanks for making it through with me. Wow, that happened and it came together quite well. It's definitely a finish I want to try again, both with rust and harsh finish effects, and it was fast, easy, and pretty cool to do. Let me know what you think about sharing experiments like this and what you think of the bonus exclusive material this time. Thanks as always for the support, and more soon. Cheers from Link. Thanks guys. Come and join our fun Facebook group. Friendly, helpful tips and advice. Now, I'm the biggest fan of support local. Doing so empowers Hobbyco and Little Robot to provide us with an amazing Gunpla Builders World Cup show, a thriving community to make friends and share the hobby with, and a really cool in-store experience. Huge shout out to my top supporters, the Rocket Punch Brobot team. Ivan, MB, Grant, Con, Jack, Alexander, RJ, Simon, Robert, Kelso, Kevin, Nilos, and David. And a sincere appreciation for our Patreon community for your support and making this content possible. Wow, you guys are amazing. Always, thank you.